During the 1930s, Myrna Loy was known as the Queen of Hollywood. She'd come up the hard way, making 80 low-budget films where she had to play schlocky characters in the role of a vamp. But in the sound era, she had reverted to her natural red hair and developed her natural, wholesome, witty, and lovable personality. She starred opposite greats like William Powell, Cary Grant, and Clark Gable, and she even had the ear of President Roosevelt. But there was one other, much darker figure who was crazy about Myrna, and his fascination for her led to one of the most dramatic and infamous moments in American criminal history. This is the seductive, witty, and martini-soaked tale of Myrna Loy, the Queen of Hollywood. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Myrna Adele Williams was born in Helena, Montana, on August 2, 1905, into a family with Welsh roots. Her name was rather unromantically inspired by a railroad water stop favored by her father, David, who was a rancher. Her mother, Adele May, was a talented musician who had studied at the American Conservatory of Music in Chicago, Illinois. Myrna and her younger brother, David, were raised on the ranch, which was quite successful at the turn of the 20th century. Their father later ventured into banking and real estate, and even entered politics, becoming the youngest man ever elected to the Montana state legislature. His progressive views influenced Myrna's outlook on life. She once said, "It was part of the air I breathed. I was taught early in life that there was a relationship between the world and me." The family was inclusive and welcoming, a trait particularly evident when they were among the few to welcome an African-American family that moved into the area. Loy remembered, "Mother made no distinction. She welcomed them and encouraged us to play with them." Myrna and David also played with other local children, including Gary Cooper, whom Myrna would later encounter in Hollywood. Tragedy nearly struck the family in 1912 when Myrna's mother contracted pneumonia and nearly died. Once she was well enough, Loy's father sent her and Myrna to La Jolla, California, for recovery in the warmer climate. During a visit, Adele convinced her husband to invest in real estate there, so he began to buy up land, including a lot later sold to Charlie Chaplin. Although they returned to Montana, the family would soon head back to California again when Adele needed a hysterectomy. David Sr. purchased a house in Ocean Park for his wife and children. While Adele recovered, she arranged for Myrna and David to tour a movie studio. Myrna's interest in acting blossomed during this tour of the lot. Myrna also explored dancing, and she continued her dance training upon returning to Montana. In 1917, she performed her version of the Bluebird from the Rose Dream operetta at Helena's Marlowe Theater. The next year, the Williams family faced the devastating impact of the Spanish influenza arriving in Helena. Myrna later recounted the fear that gripped the community, saying, "People walked the streets with makeshift surgical masks over their mouths." Both her brother and mother contracted the disease, and Myrna and her father tended to them until they recovered. Unfortunately, Myrna fell ill herself, and her father took on the sole responsibility of nursing her. Exhausted and stressed, he then caught the illness and sadly did not recover. While Myrna was recuperating at a neighbor's house, she learned of her father's death. One of her final memories of him was his heartfelt plea for her to look after her mother and brother should anything happen to him. At just 13, Myrna committed herself to fulfilling this promise. Finding no reason to stay in Montana, Adele quickly relocated her family back to California. She was again drawn by the healing promise of its year-round sunshine. Once settled in their new home in Culver City, Myrna dedicated herself to training for her hoped-for career. She continued her dance lessons, now adding ballet to the regime. Her mother worked hard giving music lessons to keep Myrna in the prestigious Westlake School for Girls. Meanwhile, Myrna became interested in art, which led to her transferring to Venice High School. She also started teaching dance at the Ritter School of Expression, giving her $40 monthly earnings to her mother. In 1921, Myrna posed for Harry Fielding Weinbrenner, an art teacher at Venice High, as a central figure in his sculpture, Fountain of Education. Her form was immortalized in white concrete and installed in 1923 in front of the campus pool, where it stood for years. The Los Angeles Times featured a story on the sculpture and mentioned her by name. When the sculpture was displayed on the battleship Nevada during a Memorial Day pageant, Myrna was invited to participate. By then, she had finished high school and was working as an atmospheric dancer at Grauman's Egyptian Theater, alongside other Grauman's alumni like Lupe Velez. While working at Grauman's, Myrna was inspired by Eleonora Duse' acting technique after seeing the film Thy Will Be Done. She aspired to emulate Duse for the rest of her acting career. Her break came when Hollywood photographer Henry Waxman visited Grauman's to photograph its dancers. One of these photos caught the eye of no lesser figure than Rudolph Valentino, who then cast her in 1925's What Price? Beauty. Being picked from a crowd by Rudolph Valentino to be in his next picture was about as close to living the dream as it could get, and millions of young women would have given anything to be in her place. But Myrna was unfazed by the prospect of catching Valentino's eye. Reflecting on that time, Loy said, "I worked with the two greatest lovers in the world, at an age when I was too young to appreciate it. Valentino was a great gentleman, and so was Jack Barrymore, but Jack was also a rascal." Myrna then landed a minor part playing a slave in 1925's Ben-Hur, starring Ramon Navarro. She then landed a role in Pretty Ladies that same year. During the production of Pretty Ladies, she befriended Joan Crawford and gained recognition for her distinctive exotic and cat-like eyes. However, she felt her name didn't quite match her looks. Myrna Williams didn't quite echo the allure expected of a sultry actress known for vamp roles. The studio proposed the ridiculous Myrna Lisa as her stage name. Fortunately, a writer friend suggested Loy, a name that perfectly suited her new image, and she quickly adopted it. In 1928, Myrna Loy starred in several movies, notably The Crimson City and State Street Sadie. On October 29, 1928, the Oakland Tribune reported on her performance in State Street Sadie, writing, "The Vitaphone feature this week is State Street Sadie, starring Conrad Nagel and Myrna Loy. There is a certain variation from the usual crook theme, whatever that may be. That is to say, this story has something of novelty and interest. There is a lot of shooting and a surprising number of laughs. Although the business at hand is grim enough, Myrna Loy is exotic at times, and triumphantly lovely in voice as well as person in the one talking sequence when she is heard." With some solid reviews behind her, she was ready for her first lead role, which she landed in Bitter Apples. In this Silent, she was portraying a woman who falls in love with her husband after marrying him for revenge. Myrna was then cast in Noah's Ark, playing a dual as both a modern dancer and a biblical-era slave girl. By 1930, the surge of new actresses left Warner Brothers overwhelmed, leading them not to renew Loy's contract. Myrna had no trouble finding work in talking films, despite this setback. She appeared in 9 films that year, including The Devil to Pay, in which she acted alongside Ronald Colman and Loretta Young. This performance caught Samuel Goldwyn's eye, who then cast her with Coleman and Helen Hayes in Aerosmith, directed by John Ford. This was one of her final bad girl roles. Entering 1932, Loy had acted in over 60 films, but hadn't yet achieved major star status. That changed when Irving Thalberg of MGM took an interest in her career. He believed something was preventing her full connection with the audience and encouraged her to push on, saying, "There seems to be a veil between you and the audience. You've got to cut through it. You must reach out there and grab them." He cast her in Emma alongside Marie Dressler, and The Wet Parade with Neil Hamilton. However, it was her portrayal of a villainous Eurasian in 13 Women that finally won her major attention. Due to her eye shape, she had been regularly cast in Asian roles up to this point in her career, and this was another such role, albeit in a psychological horror with a pretty fascinating plot that seems to anticipate Carrie. She played Ursula Georgi, who had been the victim of racist bullying at school. Georgie uses astrology and manipulates a clairvoyant to take control of the girls, and one by one ensures they meet a sorry end. The film was also an early influence on slasher movies. Another notable feature of 13 Women is that it is the only film to feature Peg Entwistle, whose demise is the most iconic and chilling of any in Hollywood history. And you better believe we will have an episode all about her coming soon. That same year, Loy appeared for the last time in Asian-style makeup in The Mask of Fu Manchu, alongside Boris Karloff. Frustrated by the racially insensitive casting and dubious plot lines, she famously protested against the scene where her character was to whip a man enthusiastically, declaring, "I've done a lot of terrible things in films, but this girl's a sadistic nymphomaniac." When questioned by the Freud-ignorant producer about what a sadistic nymphomaniac was, Loy's blunt response was, "Well, you better find out, because that's what she is." One of Loy's distinguishing features was her distinctively upturned Celtic nose, described by a film critic as a wonder of nature and a plastic surgeon's paragon. During the 1930s, many young women sought to copy Loy's famously attractive profile, making her one of the most frequently requested examples in rhinoplasty surgeries as the popularity of nose jobs surged. Interestingly, at the peak of her fame, a producer suggested Loy should have her ears corrected. Under a pseudonym, she scheduled a consultation, but got more than she bargained for. At the appointment, the surgeon extensively photographed her from various angles, even having her stand on a chair. She eventually asked what was going on, and the surgeon revealed he recognized her, exclaiming, "Well, I've got your nose, Miss Loy." Perhaps unsurprisingly, she never went through with the ear surgery. Myrna Loy was widely admired for her alluring charm, earning her the nickname, the perfect wife. Even the Jimmy Stewart once said, "There ought to be a law against any man who doesn't marry Myrna Loy." Fans even formed "Men Must Marry Myrna" clubs in her honor. Loy's professional path could have declined in the early 1930s, if not for her meeting with director W.S. Van Dyke. He cast her in the daring Penthouse, where she plays a call girl who helps a lawyer solve a murder case. On her first day on set, after a brief but failed attempt at filming, Van Dyke pulled her aside and reassured her, saying, "You don't have to act. This part calls for a typical American girl, and you're certainly the type yourself, Myrna, and that's what I want." She took his advice and transitioned from the exotic vamp to the girl next door persona. Impressed by her performance, Van Dyke advocated for her with MGM executives Thalberg and Louis B. Mayer. Van Dyke explained that given the right roles, Loy could become a major star. He was right, and Thalberg and Mayer decided Van Dyke was the man to make her into that star. In any case, her vamp persona was never going to last, not least because under her luxurious dark hair, she was in fact a natural redhead, but also it just wasn't who she was. Loy's casting as vamps and femme fatales struck director John Ford as ironic. He remarked, Wouldn't you know, the kid they picked to play the tramps is the only good girl in Hollywood. Like many of his contemporaries, Ford had a long-standing crush on Loy, and he wasn't the only one. A far more notorious figure also had his eyes only for Myrna, and it would lead to a dramatic conclusion. We've been going through Myrna's filmography, and we have a few recommendations we'd like to share with you. But our first recommendation is, of course, to grab a copy of her famous memoir, Being and Becoming, which we have quoted from several times in this video. If you grab a copy on Kindle or on paperback via the Amazon link in the description, we get a small kickback at no extra cost to you, which really helps out the channel. Otherwise, how about this fantastic DVD collection of Myrna and William Powell? You may have seen all of the Thin Man movies, but this collection is everything else they did, from the infamous Manhattan melodrama to Love Crazy, and we dropped in a couple more Myrna pics in the links below. When you've watched them, come back to the comments to let us know what you think of these classics. But for now, back to the video. Sunday, July 22nd, 1934. It was exceptionally hot in Chicago. Countless residents, exhausted by the Depression, sought refuge in the city's cinemas to escape the heat. Many went for the opulent theaters operated by Balaban and Katz, dressing up to visit grand venues like the Chicago, the Oriental, the Riviera, and the Uptown. Others kept it simple, walking to local theaters. As evening approached, filmgoers headed downtown for the latest releases, or to smaller venues for second-run movies. In the Lincoln Park neighborhood, the Biograph Theater, a smaller but well-maintained venue, was screening the gangster film Manhattan Melodrama. This was Loy's latest movie, and the first she starred in with her longtime co-star, William Powell. The movie ended around 10:30 p.m., and the audience spilled out under the Biograph's marquee, lingering around displays showing stills of stars Clark Gable, Loy, and Powell. Unbeknownst to them, men in dark suits were tensely positioned near a group of large sedans across the street, as a man with a bright smile and accompanied by two women, one dressed in a striking red, exited the theater. A nearby man casually lighting a cigar suddenly locked eyes with him. Dropping his cigar, he pulled out a gun and commanded the smiling man to stop. Ignoring the command, the man reached into his pocket and sprinted towards an alley next to the theater. A chase ensued with gunfire, ending with the man falling, struck by 2 bullets. This man was John Dillinger, the infamous gangster, now fatally wounded by FBI agents. According to Michael Mann's Public Enemies, it was FBI agent Melvin Purvis who orchestrated the sting operation, using Dillinger's affection for Myrna Loy as a lure. As Dillinger's body was taken to the morgue, and spectators soaked up his blood with their handkerchiefs as morbid keepsakes, the importance of his demise wasn't lost on the crowd. Dillinger had chosen the Biograph specifically to watch Manhattan Melodrama. Known for his love of gangster movies, as noted by informant Anna Sage, the infamous Lady in Red, he was particularly smitten with Myrna Loy. He had been in hiding for a long time and had always eluded the government agents. But finally, he broke cover to go to the movies and see Myrna on screen. In the end, his death mirrored the dramatic twists of the gangster films that he adored. Some might say that John Dillinger's final fatal flaw was not his criminal endeavors, but his infatuation with Myrna Loy. And in 1934, Loy also starred opposite Clark Gable in Men in White. Loy recalled, "By that time he was hot, the big rage. All the women in Hollywood, including my friend, Lou McFarlane, were talking about him. I'd heard he was always on the make at the studio, after everyone, snapping garters left and right. At the dance, though, he acted like a perfect gentleman, attentive but not aggressive. Whenever I hear Dancing in the Dark, I think of him. because we danced to it that night, and he was vibrant and warm, a marvelous dancer. It was divine. W.S. Van Dyke had now been charged with fulfilling his own claims to Myrna's star potential. He saw her as a possible fit for his next film, an adaptation of the Dashiell Hammett novel, but he wasn't 100% convinced yet. He felt he needed to test her sense of humor, so he impulsively pushed Loy into a swimming pool during a Hollywood party. Her good-natured reaction won her the role as Nora Charles in The Thin Man. Powell and Loy excelled together, though the filming had its challenges. Loy recounted a particularly grueling day when they had to film many takes around a dinner table laden with oysters. They began to putrefy. By the time we finished that scene, nobody ever wanted to see another oyster. The Thin Man was a major success, earning an Oscar nomination for Best Film, and was a career turning point for Loy. She later described it as the film that finally made me after more than 80 films. The Thin Man series anchored Loy's career for several years, while she simultaneously explored other roles as an ascending MGM star. Despite being cast in major films, not all were successful. For example, her film with Cary Grant, Wings in the Dark, did not fare well. Though Loy received positive remarks from the New York Times, Miss Loy continues to be the most refreshing and delightfully real of the cinema's young women, and she is entirely likable as a lady stunt flyer who helps the afflicted airman to recapture his faith in himself. Next, Myrna Loy starred alongside Spencer Tracy in Whipsaw. Tracy spoke about their dynamic. I couldn't figure her out. I'd just come from the Riff Raff set, where Jean Harlow had spent her leisure time making life merry for me and the rest of the crew. But here was a girl who finished her scene and retired into a corner to study her script. There must be something wrong with one of us. I prowled around for a day or two, then I marched myself up to her. What's the matter with me? Have I got leprosy or something? Myrna smiled. I've been wondering when you were going to come and pay me a little attention. That was all I needed. 24 hours later, we were on ribbing terms. This was the beginning of their relaxed rapport during the filming, and as it was long rumored, a lasting affair. Loy's next major success was again alongside Clark Gable, this time in Wife vs. Secretary. During this film, she also worked with Jean Harlow, for whom she developed a great admiration. Loy said, Jean was beautiful, but far from the raucous sexpot of her films. As a matter of fact, she began to shake that image in Wife vs. Secretary. She'd begged for a role that didn't require spouting slang and modeling lingerie. She even convinced them to darken her hair a shade in hopes of toning down that brash image. It worked. Where sex is concerned, the double entendre, the ambiguity, it seems to me is much more effective than being too explicit. This is something the movie makers don't seem to understand today. Loy also spoke about Clark Gable's less-known traits in her memoirs. She recounted how they would spend evenings reading Shakespeare and other poetry together after shooting for the day had ended. Loy said, he loved poetry and read beautifully, with great sensitivity, but he wouldn't dare let anyone else know it. By 1936, despite her rising fame, Loy was not receiving financial rewards commensurate with her celebrity status. After unsuccessful attempts to negotiate a raise with MGM, she decided to take a stand and not work until they revised their payment policy toward her. Her resolve led her to travel to Europe for a period, while she waited for the studio to blink first. Eventually, MGM relented, and through her agent, Myron Selznick, she secured a salary of $3,500 a week. Also in 1936, she surprised many who thought of her as a perpetual single by marrying Arthur Hornblow Jr., a producer she had met during the filming of Aerosmith. Loy's career was in full swing that year, and together with William Powell, she starred in 3 major films: Libeled Lady, The Great Ziegfeld, and After the Thin Man. Regarding her performance in Libeled Lady, Variety noted, "Even though Libeled Lady goes overboard on plot, and its pace snags badly in several spots, Metro has brought in a socceroo of a comedy. Of the starring foursome, Myrna Loy's is the only behavior which is kept pretty much on a serious plane. As the much misunderstood poor little rich girl, she projects an effective performance." The Great Ziegfeld was well received and remains a classic, but not all critics were fond of Loy's portrayal. One critic said that Loy as Billy Burke was somewhat lacking in Burke's effervescence and gaiety, and another described her performance as stilted, like her rigidly waxed and set blonde wig. However, it was After the Thin Man that captured the hearts of fans and critics alike. Many felt that the second installment was as good, as if not even better than, the first. It was a smash hit, and remains a much-loved entry in the series to this day. In 1937, Loy was crowned alongside Clark Gable as King and Queen of Hollywood in a poll organized by Ed Sullivan, triumphing over stars like Loretta Young and Shirley Temple. But this didn't stop their next film together, Parnell, from being critically panned. Loy recalled the backlash from fans unaccustomed to seeing her and Gable in roles so far removed from their usual screen personas. She said, "Disgruntled fans wrote to the studio by the thousands. They did that in those days. Some of the critics complained that we played against type. We were actors, for God's sake. We couldn't be Blackie Norton and Nora Charles all the time." After the failure of Parnell, Loy bounced back with Test Pilot, which became a favorite of hers. She later reunited with Gable for Too Hot to Handle, which received positive reviews from Variety for its slick production and the dynamic performances of Gable and Loy. Myrna Loy then took on the role of Lady Esketh in The Rains Came. Reviews were lukewarm, but as often happens, audiences loved it. Next up was the third Thin Man movie, Shadow of the Thin Man. The film featured stellar performances from a cast that included Stella Adler and Alan Baxter. Even though some of the magic of the first 2 films had worn off, it was still a huge hit and has plenty of Nick and Nora's patented booze and banter dynamic. As World War II loomed, Loy continued acting, with one of her last pre-war roles in Love Crazy, which was released in 1941. Loy was deeply affected by the attack on Pearl Harbor. She immediately decided to pause her acting career to support the war effort. She dedicated herself to working with the Red Cross, participating in war bond rallies, and visiting hospitals to uplift troops. This was a commitment that made her the only major female star to completely halt her film work during the war. Loy's staunch anti-Germany stance and her vocal criticisms led to her films being banned in Nazi Germany and her being blacklisted by the NSDAP. These views also strained her marriage. After expressing her uncompromising opinions, she found herself at odds with her husband, and they divorced. She soon began a new relationship with John Hertz Jr., who had made a fortune in the car rental business. They had a whirlwind romance and married, but their marriage was short-lived due to Hertz's abusive behavior, which ultimately resulted in Loy ending the marriage after he hit her so hard she had 2 black eyes. This dramatic period of her life was widely reported, with United Press International covering her divorce announcement, citing incompatibility of character as the reason for the split. While Myrna Loy's contribution to the war effort was greatly appreciated by the American public, post-war they were also eager to see her back on the big screen. Their wish was granted with 1945's The Thin Man Goes Home, featuring Loy and Powell once more. However, the film received mediocre reviews. Next, MGM cast her alongside Spencer Tracy in The Sea of Grass, but she was unexpectedly replaced by Katharine Hepburn. This was the first sign that things were shifting in her career. She did not take this snub lightly, and she requested to be released from her MGM contract to explore opportunities with other studios. She joined Sam Goldwyn for The Best Years of Our Lives. She had reservations about working with director William Wyler. She wrote, "My only reservation about doing The Best Years of Our Lives concerned working with William Wyler, because of all the stories from Bette Davis and other actors about his endless retakes and bullying. I hear Wyler's a sadist." I told Goldwyn. "That's not true," he replied. "He's just a very mean fellow." But the film turned out to be a success for Loy, winning her a Best Actress award at the 1947 Brussels World Film Festival. In 1946, Loy found another husband, marrying Jean Markey, a screenwriter and war hero. Markey was himself on his third Hollywood wife, having been previously married to Joan Bennett and Hedy Lamarr. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given their previous records, Loy and Markey divorced 3 years later. That year, she also took on a new role as a delegate to UNESCO. She was very enthused about the organization, which appealed to her in a world which had just experienced the devastating catastrophe of World War II. She said, "UNESCO's work is unspectacular and doesn't attract nearly all the attention that it should. Naturally, the debates before the main body of the United Nations are much more dramatic, but UNESCO is doing a constructive work which has as its goal a world where peace and plentifulness are not subjects to discuss, but such accepted facts that no one thinks about them." Loy reunited with Powell for The Song of the Thin Man, their sixth and final film in the series. The New York Times assured fans that Nick and Nora Charles remained as delightful as ever, and the new arrival in their relationship, a baby son, had not slowed down their boozy nightlife and crime-solving antics. Although the film was not groundbreaking, it was well received as a send-off to the legendary series. Nick and Nora had become an ideal recipe for a happy marriage, albeit a boozy and often irresponsible one. Their constant ribbing and witty banter was a means of expressing love and devotion. Off-screen, both Powell and Loy had tempestuous and difficult relationships that could never live up to their fictional marriage. You can hear all about William Powell's incredible life in our video all about him, showing up on screen now. She said of Powell, "Perhaps it's because it isn't like working. Bill and I seem to be kidding along, and the next thing you know, the picture is finished." Loy also found enjoyment working alongside Cary Grant, first in The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer in 1947, where she played a mature judge tangled in a love triangle involving her teenage sister, portrayed by Shirley Temple, in one of her final roles. Later in Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House, she showed off her comedic timing as one half of a couple dealing with the challenges of building their own home. This theme resonated with many GIs returning from war, and it was a boom time for self-built houses. After marriage to Markey dissolved, she channeled her energy into political activism. Her first task was opposing the House Committee on Un-American Activities, witch hunt tactics, which she was highly critical of. In her view, destroying someone's career for having their own political opinions was the only un-American thing taking place in the purview of the HUAC. A committed liberal, she was a close friend of Eleanor Roosevelt and an active campaigner for Democratic presidential candidates. She became a pen pal of President Roosevelt, and he was somewhat infatuated with her, calling her his favorite movie star, and never missing an opportunity to find out more about her from lobbying Hollywood producers he met. It was claimed by Lauren Bacall, and probably tongue-in-cheek, that he considered calling off the Yalta Conference, which brought about the end of the war in Europe, so he could meet Myrna. But he attended Yalta, dying 2 months later having never met his favorite movie star in person. Loy stood up against HUAC and confronted disgruntled playwright Myron Fagan. The political battle lines being drawn at that time are one which are still very much in evidence today. In 1945, Fagan stated that he was shown secret documents about the Yalta meetings by writer John T. Flynn, inspiring him to write the plays Red Rainbow and Thieves' Paradise. Red Rainbow depicts Franklin Roosevelt, Joseph Stalin, and others at Yalta as they plan to hand over the Balkans, Eastern Europe, and Berlin to Stalin. In New York, left-wing groups opposed the production of the play, and Fagan struggled to secure financial support. He later brought the play to Hollywood. Despite fierce opposition, Thieves' Paradise premiered at the Las Palmas Theater in Hollywood on December 26, 1947, starring Howard Johnson. Johnson faced such severe harassment that he ended up in St. Vincent's Hospital with a nervous breakdown after just 6 performances, and he never acted in Hollywood again. By the late 1940s, Fagan had launched a crusade against what he described as a red conspiracy in Hollywood, which led to the creation of the Cinema Educational Guild. He accused the United Nations, ostensibly Myrna's new employers, of covertly conspiring with the Soviet Union to establish a form of global government, with Hollywood providing the propaganda. Loy and Fagan were set for a showdown. Among those targeted in the Red Scare were prominent Hollywood figures like Charlie Chaplin, criticized for his neutrality early in World War II. This period also brought about Senator Joseph McCarthy's infamous claims in 1950 about communists in the State Department. Fears were intensifying during the early Cold War, and people felt it was only a matter of time before nuclear war began. In the 1950s, the fear of communism thrust the HUAC into prominence, but the tide turned against McCarthyism in the mid-decade during the McCarthy Army hearings. These hearings were broadcast live on television and showed McCarthy applying pressure to Army chiefs to give preferential treatment to their political allies in the military. This corrupt behavior was seen by the American public in full, and the public still held very positive views of the U.S. Army after the heroic actions of World War II. The whole affair tarnished the reputations of McCarthy and his anti-communist crusaders. Prior to his downfall, any publicity from HUAC could lead to the dreaded blacklist, which meant no work and no support. A person could be completely ostracized without the opportunity to clear their name. Myrna Loy, despite facing the blacklist, successfully pressured Fagan to withdraw his accusations against her. While her political engagements did not harm her career, her advancing age did start to change the roles she received. However, she had solidified her image as the ideal mother figure, with her role in Cheaper by the Dozen, which was both a commercial hit and critically acclaimed. Myrna Loy takes her place very nicely and very humbly as the mother of the brood, praised the New York Times. She continued this maternal portrayal in the 1952 sequel, Bells on Their Toes, though critics responded more tepidly. In 1951, Loy married Howland Sargent, then Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs. She had finally stepped outside the movie industry for one of her marriages. They divorced in 1960. Loy wrote about her multiple marriages in her memoirs. I suppose if I were doing that today, I wouldn't get married so many times. But in those days, we still had this thing that we had to get married. Not that I didn't love each of the men I married, but I might not have felt the need to make it official. In her later years, Loy transitioned to supporting roles in films like The Ambassador's Daughter and Lonely Hearts. Her role in From the Terrace was a departure from her earlier image, portraying an aging, unhappy wife, which was a real contrast to her former roles as the perfect spouse. Loy's association with the archetype of the perfect wife somewhat conflicted with her own perspectives on the role. She didn't mind being portrayed as a good wife, but she was unhappy that this role seemed to suggest she was sexless. She once remarked, "I prefer Gore Vidal's description of my image, the eternal good sex woman wife, which removes the puritanical connotation of perfect. What man would want a perfect wife anyway?" She recognized that her roles needed to evolve with time. The one thing no actress can beat is time. You can delay its ravages with the help of an adroit cameraman, but you cannot fool the public, which started watching you in films 25 or 30 years ago, that you've remained a spring chicken while they've become grandmothers. In motion pictures, an actress either quits at the height of her fame and beauty, as Garbo did, or you edge your way into character and feature parts, as I'm doing. In this business, men get away with murder. I know actors 55 and 60 years old who are playing love leads opposite 25-year-old actresses. At times, the combinations appear ludicrous. Myrna was not completely content with the roles she was being offered as she aged. This dissatisfaction led her to leave Hollywood for the theater. In 1961, she took part in 2 summer stock productions, before starring in Neil Simon's celebrated 1960s play, Barefoot in the Park. Myrna Loy was known for her deep loyalty to friends and a strong sense of justice, and these qualities sometimes led to tension. This was evident when Christina Crawford joined the cast of Barefoot in the Park. Loy described the experience saying, "We didn't have any problems in Barefoot until Christina Crawford appeared. I've never known anybody else like her. Ever. Her stubbornness was really unbelievable. She would not do a single thing that anybody told her to do. You'd go out there on stage and you couldn't find her. One thing an actor needs to know is exactly where people are on the stage. Christina completely disregarded her blocking, throwing the rest of us off. The director couldn't do anything with her. Absolutely nothing. She was going to do it her way. It was self-defeating and sad, because the girl had potential. She wanted to be Joan Crawford. I think that's the basis of the book she wrote afterward and everything else. I saw what her mind created, the fantasy world she lived in. She envied her mother, grew to hate her, and wanted to destroy her." Loy's activism extended into her later years, particularly during the politically charged 60s and 70s. She was vocal in her opposition to the Vietnam War. This was a contrast with her enthusiastic support for American entry into World War II. On one occasion, someone asked her to sign an old photo of herself in a USO uniform. She said, "Those times were different than today. I would never don such an outfit in support for the current conflict in Vietnam." Loy was unrelenting in her liberal worldview and her right to express it. Not all were especially taken with her stance, beyond those who were inevitably opposed to her ideologically. Some merely perceived her as a do-gooder. This was a label she took particular issue with, saying, "That do-gooder expression was created by people who simply don't want to change in the status quo. People who are convinced that the world is made up of haves and have-mores. They don't care if slums can be replaced by decent housing, or if the lot of deprived kids can be improved. The expression do-gooder doesn't disturb those who care deeply about improvement. All it does is to make those who use the expression downgrade themselves." Although Loy continued to appear in films such as Airport 75 and The End, and made several TV movies, her later years were afflicted by declining health, which limited her professional engagements during the last 14 years of her life. But she could never completely retire. Even while battling breast cancer, Myrna continued to act, starring alongside Henry Fonda in 1981's Summer Solstice. Fonda personally approached her for the role, telling her, "It's a mature love story, which ought to be told." Loy responded with admiration for Fonda, saying, "We have the same approach to acting, to be as real as possible." Loy devoted the early 1980s to writing her memoirs, titled Myrna Loy, Being and Becoming, which became a huge hit and one of the best-selling Hollywood memoirs of all time. The book details her extensive political activism, including her work for the United Nations and her involvement in various Democratic presidential campaigns, alongside reflections on her early days in Montana, her Hollywood career, and her later work on stage. Loy's contributions to cinema were finally recognized with multiple awards. She received Career Achievement Awards from the National Board of Review in 1979 and the Los Angeles Film Critics in 1983. The pinnacle of these accolades came in 1991 when she received an honorary Career Academy Award. It had long been considered an oversight by the Academy that she had never won an Oscar. This honorary award was largely due to the efforts of screenwriter Michael Rusnow, who organized a campaign for her recognition. During the acceptance, delivered via satellite from her Manhattan apartment, Loy spoke briefly. "You've made me very happy. Thank you very much," she said. At the ceremony, Angelica Houston introduced her, praising Loy for embodying grace, gaiety, and independence of spirit. Film clips from Loy's career were shown, ranging from her early appearance as a coquettish Oriental dancer in Show of Shows to her role in the television program Love, Sydney, with plenty of excerpts from the Thin Man series. The event also featured the East Coast premiere of a restored version of The Animal Kingdom from 1932. Lauren Bacall, co-chairman of the Tribute Benefit Committee, then spoke about Loy. Bacall said, "How many women do we know who were continually kissed by Clark Gable, William Powell, Cary Grant, Spencer Tracy, and Frederick March? Only one, Myrna Loy. And to meet whom did Franklin D. Roosevelt find himself tempted to call off the Yalta Conference? Myrna Loy. And to see what lady in what picture did John Dillinger risk coming out of hiding to meet his bullet-ridden death in an alley in Chicago? Myrna Loy in Manhattan Melodrama." After her celebrated evening, Loy was never seen on film again. She lived for 2 more years, passing away on December 14, 1993, at the age of 88. Although she spent most of her life in Hollywood, she was laid to rest in her native Montana, close to the remaining members of her family. In her expansive career spanning 120 films, actress Myrna Loy transitioned from the role of a sultry vamp to the archetype of the perfect wife, sensible, warm-hearted, yet still sexy and sophisticated. That's about all we have for you on the Queen of Hollywood. If you want to help out the channel, then please consider becoming a YouTube member or joining our Patreon. Starting from $1 a month, you'll get access to exclusive content. Also, our $3 tier on Patreon and YouTube membership, Hollywood Histories, has in-depth mini essays on all kinds of strange and unusual aspects of Tinseltown every Tuesday. Or if you join our Lana tier for 3 months, you can request a video on a Hollywood star of your choice. That's all for this episode of Hollywood Mysteries. Sweet dreams.